Good afternoon, Friday, March 22nd. I hope everyone's doing well today. After you've probably shoveled, maybe if you're in that position of having to shovel, I'm looking at my walks thinking I need to get out and shovel. I want to talk about a couple things today, 3 things today. I'm just going to shift this comment over a little bit, or this phone over, as I work off the 3 devices. So I want to talk about Arts Commons transformation. I want to talk about the housing continuum with respect to the proposed rezoning. So I want to touch on the housing continuum. Again, these are a bit of teasers for the online Q&A that's happening on April 8th. And then I want to kind of talk a little bit about the process to rezoning, essentially like how did we get here and what are the respective roles and responsibilities of administration, of the public, and of council. So those are the 3 things that I want to talk about today. So I want to talk really just briefly on the Arts Commons transformation. So the province made their large announcement today. So this was announced in their provincial budget, but they did an announcement today about the sustained funding that they're doing for Arts Commons transformation. So this is really Olympic Plaza, but also the Arts Commons, the building itself. And this is really good news. Arts and culture are growing in the city. We know that Olympic Plaza is being used by a lot of our ethnocultural groups for large festivals. And the space is not accommodating in the way that it used to be due to the growth and the presence of lots of different individuals and groups. And in particular, I think about accessible design. So those are individuals with disabilities, physical disabilities. Maybe they're in a wheelchair, or maybe they have a sight disability. And it's not great accessible design because, of course, it was built in the 80s. And I'll say I have memories of going to medal ceremonies in '88, and like being on my mom's shoulders and watching that. I would have been 7 at the time. So, but this is a big deal for Calgary when we think about the importance of arts and culture in our city, and having a space that groups can come to, that we can invite, and then they can invite the broader community to be part of what they want to offer. So, it's going to be a hiccup. It's going to be a headache. But I'm super excited for it. And then the Arts Commons Committee will meet today actually at 1:00. So I'll head down to City Hall in here in just a little bit. We'll talk at 1:00 and we are going to get to preview the design. So that's super exciting. And then I'm not exactly sure when we're releasing it to the public, but it's very exciting. I also acknowledge there are a lot of families who have bricks down at Olympic Plaza, and the group is thinking very, very hard about how we may be able to remove those so that people can have that legacy piece that is there as well, but also thinking about what could the future legacy piece be for Calgarians to be a part of. So that's also a part of the conversation that we know that we have going on. So rezoning is a hot topic across the city, and I want to talk about the housing continuum. One of the comments I hear very frequently is that this won't create affordable housing. And so I want to distinguish a couple things. I want to distinguish the difference between what we call now capital A affordable housing. So that is provided by generally nonprofit housing providers, where there is an application process and you are screened and then you are placed into housing that is managed and maintained by that housing provider, versus affordable housing or market affordability. So housing that fits your income, and what that housing continuum looks like. So if you're on Facebook, we'll drop the link into the housing continuum graphic. That's by Canada Mortgage and Housing Company. I've put the link in the notes on YouTube as well. And if you're on Instagram, you can just afterwards search CMHC Housing Continuum. And so what it really talks about is that people could be at different stages and different parts of their life. And so when you think about maybe when you were a university student, what kind of housing you might have sought, and that could have been even on-campus housing as a degree in the housing continuum versus where you might be as a senior. But if you are a fixed income senior, where affordable housing, so capital A affordable housing for seniors, fits into this. And so there's a whole continuum. The challenge right now, and the criticism that a rezoning process won't provide capital A affordable housing, it's That's not entirely true that it won't provide capital A affordable housing. We do have some housing providers. I think of some more like Habitat for Humanity, where they often build row houses, and the houses that they're building with their clients are row house type projects. They're not because of the way that they're structured. And so this opens up opportunities for them to do a little bit more of that in established neighborhoods, whereas right now most Habitat for Humanity homes are buying like new property. So like those are some interesting dynamics that exist there. But there is also opportunity for other like um, having a Friday moment. Not nonprofit housing providers to buy individual properties to also build housing as well. That potential does exist, but we haven't created that opportunity for them. So I know Attainable Homes talks about this quite often, that they would like to actually buy and develop smaller properties, so RCG, HGO type properties, because it's actually more expeditious and it costs less than like large multifamily buildings. And so in the housing continuum, there are non-market or like nonprofit housing providers who do and want the opportunity to build RCG products and HGO products. And then let's talk about the affordability continuum. So we talk about a 30% threshold. So your income at 30% is what you should be spending on housing. So my salary is public, so we'll work off of my salary and we'll disclose. So I take home about $125,000 a year by the time all of the benefits are added into that. So 30% of that on a monthly basis works out to about $2,800. So let's say $3,000. Now, so if you were an individual, as if you're like one counselor, right? And so like, let's take my circumstance. I'm a counselor. I've got 2 kids. I've got a dog. So those are some factors. So if I were to go onto Rent Faster right now and see what I could find for $2,800, I don't know that I would find a lot, to be perfectly honest, right? So I'm like fortunate to have housing. I get that. I respect that. So when we think about that, so now just take that and put in your family's take home or your family's salary, like annual, and this is like before taxes, right? So 30% before taxes, and start to see what's out there in the market. So what happens when the market, when the cost of rents and or housing, right? Because that's also like, that'd be like, $3,000 for a mortgage. So and so like, that's assuming you have like money for a down payment and all those factors anyways, but let's even just say that it's rent. So when the costs of rent are going up, so we're talking about $2,000 for a 1-bedroom apartment. I can tell you, I have a sniffle. One sec. That was just couldn't help it. Sorry. When you talk about the scale, and so what happens is when the costs of housing are so high in the market, essentially pushes and downloads more people into that bracket of needing affordable housing or below market housing. And so it's putting because we don't have enough supply in the market, because we don't have enough supply to keep rents competitive and lower, it's putting a lot of downward pressure on the affordable housing market. So I sit on the board of Calgary Housing Company. And a couple of my colleagues, they sit on Attainable, and some of my colleagues sit on Silvera for seniors. And so I was on Silvera. I stepped back from that, just from like workload perspective, step back from that. So, but from Calgary Housing Company's perspective, because of the incredible rise in rents, and I tell you, we get emails on a weekly basis that talk about rents going up, not 10%, not 20%, 40%. People are now, their rents are way, way above their 30% threshold. And so they are coming to affordable housing providers and having the conversations, and they now qualify because of where market rents are versus non-market rents or below market rents. They now essentially qualify for affordable housing. And so, yes, we don't have enough affordable housing. Absolutely. And we are working on building that. And then that's part of the strategy. But in order to not download onto the affordable housing market, we need little a affordable. We need attainable. People talk about like attainable, I guess, and for income. in the market as well. So those are really, really important parts. So when we talk about adding supply into the market, that adds competition into the market. And those are a lot of really good factors that keep supply. So this is like market economics. So anyways, I wanted to talk about that on the housing continuum as an understanding. I also want to talk about that's just the fact that we're proposing something called missing middle. And so, yes, we have plans for transit-oriented development. If you look at most transit-oriented development, it is high-rise. It tends to be 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. It's costly. It's very, very, very costly to do high-rise buildings. From a process perspective, it's very lengthy, and it's not actually very cost favorable to do like 3 bedroom apartments. So like that's another thing that like 3 bedroom apartments are very challenging to build, which is where the row housing fits into that continuum, even if you look at scale and height and different all those factors. So if you even look at the housing continuum, you will notice even the shape of those buildings shift. And so we're talking specifically about that middle piece right there. And so we know that we need TOD. We still know we need 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. We absolutely know that we need that. But what we're talking about is what are the living options between apartment and house? That's what we're talking about with RCG and HCO. And that's also what we're talking about because the third component in the strategy that's being proposed is also suites. And so being a more permissive of having more than 1 suite on a single property. And so if you then have like a standalone single, you could have a basement suite and you could even put a suite in or on your garage. Those would be other options as well. And so again, providing different housing options for people to be at different points in their life or at different points in their community or where people are needing help and supports. So those are also being contemplated in the rezoning. And I think those are being missed a little bit about what some of those other opportunities for housing in communities are beyond just RCG. And so I think I'm going to dig into that one a little bit next week and specifically on that policy and the pros and cons, because there's pros and cons to it. And there's pros and cons to everything, for sure. So just noting that so RCG is being proposed because it fits into the housing continuum. When we look at the data around new builds, and we compare new to new because that's the most fair thing to do. And if you were to go into neighborhoods right now, so I think of neighborhoods like Oak Ridge, I think of neighborhoods like Palliser, where we do have, and they tend to be clusters of row housing, condo, townhome type style. If you compare even an older condo to an older single, there is a cost differential. And so it's no different that for new. So a new RCG product right now is averaging about $600,000. A new single in an established neighborhood is averaging $1.6 million. So when we talk about affordability, affordability compared to income, $600,000 is attainable for a lot more people than $1.6 million. So when we talk on that affordability continuum around RCG, and when we talk about providing more affordable homes, not necessarily capital A affordable, but you definitely need a much lower income threshold to get to a $600,000 home than a $1.6 million home when we're talking new for new. There were some data and stats that I even just came out around Oak Ridge not that long ago. And same thing. So you can look at that. So now I just want to talk about the process of rezoning a little bit. I'm going to say I have 3 minutes left. Rezoning. So the conversation came from, we struck a housing and affordability task force. That housing and affordability task force did lots of engagement with industry, with the public. And then they created a suite of recommendations. Those recommendations were then forwarded on the direction of council to our administration, to city administration, in order to create a housing strategy. So then the housing strategy came forward with 80 plus recommendations that span everything from targeting the both capital A affordable housing market to the small A affordable housing market. So like the market, so non-market or below market and market. And so looking again at that housing continuum, there is a spectrum there. And it includes everything from policy changes at the city level to advocacy. So as a whole suite of things. And so we then heard from the public on that housing strategy for 2+ days. So happy to have chaired that meeting. I will say it was like one of the highlights. It'll probably be a highlight of my career. But we heard loud and clear from the community that this was a housing strategy that was needed. There was support for the housing strategy. One of the recommendations out of that housing strategy was to then send administration to create a plan for rezoning and then to share that plan for rezoning with the community. And so one of the criticisms that's coming forward is that the city isn't listening. So engagement looks different depending on what we're doing. So some engagement processes, input from the public is collected to form the recommendation. In this case, the recommendation came from a series of steps before and from professional planning expertise, and by looking at things that have been happening in other jurisdictions, of doing that jurisdictional scan. So as a result of what we heard through the Housing and Affordability Task Force conversation at committee, the support that was endorsed by then council, administration created the recommendation for rezoning. And so they are now sharing that recommendation with the public for the public to give their feedback on that recommendation. It is not the role and responsibility of administration to change their mind on their recommendation. They are sharing what they are recommending. It is the role and responsibility of council to listen to the public, and it is the role and the responsibility of council also to evaluate the data that is being put forward by administration. And so we are simultaneously challenged with looking at data and facts while contemplating the sentiments of the public, which there is not consensus. So, and then we have to come up with a decision of council. And so the criticism that city isn't listening is, I'm going to call it unfair, and I rarely want to pick, but listening also, the role and responsibility of the public is to also understand why is administration making this recommendation. And you cannot agree with it. That's okay. But there is a duty to understand and to then contemplate what's being put forward and to, yes, ask questions about where do those numbers come from? How did you arrive to that? And administration should be responding in kind. And a lot of that is on the city website. So on the Rezoning for Housing website, a lot of those FAQs are being answered. And then again, a lot of these questions I'm hearing, where are people going to, sorry, a lot of those questions. And so on April 8th, I am going to have a live Q&A. And so people can send their questions ahead of time and then I will answer them, but alongside my administrative colleagues, because it's really important that we talk about it from those different perspectives. And so again, my role and responsibility right now is to take in the feedback from the public and the community. And again, I am hearing all sorts of things and there is not consensus. And then we are going to probably not on April 22nd, because we know lots of people are going to speak, but sometime that week, we're going to have to make a decision on whether or not we do this. And it's not an easy decision. So I recognize that. And I know that there are a lot of emotions wrapped up in this. And I'm cognizant of that. I'm cognizant of all of the emotions on all sides of it because people are attached to their homes and the communities and the memories that they've made there. And on the flip side, there are people saying, I want a home and a community and I want to make memories. And how do we reconcile those two things? And where are we going to do that in a time of incredible population growth? And how do we do that? And how do we also balance all of the other goals that we have as a city? So do we build up? Do we build out? Where do we put people? And that's essentially the conversation is where do we put people? And when do we do that? And how do we do that? So that is it for today. Happy Friday, everybody. I will be back at some point next week and talk to you later. Bye all.